access creates a particular barrier for disabled voters. Registration difficulties, may come up from that. They may actually disenfranchise disabled people more through inadequate access provisions, which literally just, in layman's terms, they ain't got ramps. No ramps. So how the hell is Grandma gonna wheel herself up a flight of stairs to the upstairs library? In Canada, I've noticed that most of the voting stations take place in places like gymnasiums or elementary schools, college campuses, places that already have a lot of access. So I can't imagine a world where you wouldn't have a voting place just in a nice flat area where everyone can get to. Sorry. So for instance, the United Kingdom, the UK for short, the electoral register is updated annually largely by paper-based processes. This provides poor accessibility to people with visual or learning impairments. While in the US, the dependence on outdated electronic voting machines is actually tough to access for a lot of people in wheelchairs or a scooter, not to mention the tech comprehension needed for this. Older generations typically have a lot of trouble with even the machine at the local McDonald's, so can you expect Granny to pick the right name off of a list that is already very confusing and not... We can already talk about how the ballots are written as one thing, and that's not what we're talking about today, but if you've ever seen a voter ballot for counties that have a lot of different runners, it's very confusing because there's a lot of things that they have to check if they're not aware and they're just coming in and they want to vote Trump. They want to vote Trump and that's it. They might be a little confused by it because there's a little bit more steps than that, Granny. But I'm sure that she's been doing it for a long period of time, but back then they just had paper. Now it's all these machines and they're afraid of machines. And these machines are scary because they break and they're not accurate. So on one hand, we have voting machines that just, straight up don't work in a lot of cases. And then we have paper ballots that I'm familiar with and have voted with a few times. The paper ballots are hard for people to see, but you can just print them bigger and then give them to them, and that fixes it. But with the voting machines, you have to have voting machines that are lower to the ground, and ones that are lower to the ground might not be as accommodating for people that are higher to the ground. It's just so many different things could be solved if you just had, a paper ballot like we do in Canada. I don't know that much about how efficient it is. I'm just saying it's probably cheaper, and the states would equally be able to afford it. So the lack of private, accessible voting booths makes postal voting inappropriate for others with specific and physical disabilities that pertain to not being able to see. So people that walk around with an interpreter or somebody who has to be with them in order to comprehend, tasks that are stimuli that's coming in, those caretakers are not permitted to help these people vote. So in a lot of cases, these people have opinions, they have ideas, and they want to vote or support people in their community, and they simply can't because there are laws in place that say that anyone who helps those people out is committing voter fraud. You've probably heard that term a lot before. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but keep that in your mind that not everybody committing voting fraud might necessarily be in it to sway the election. They might just be helping out a friend or a family member and figured out that that's not something that they're supposed to do. There must be sufficient polling stations to minimize this queuing, which, discriminates against those with mobility or pain, fatigue-related impairments. So in 2005, 68% of polling stations in the UK were potentially inaccessible to disabled voters. This is not just a US problem, clearly, but one that is, something that disabled people face everywhere. It's something that we should probably fix here, there, everywhere. Legs are required for, what's that word again? Yes, voting. Another problem is equipment. Polling stations must be clearly signposted, low to the ground. Polling booths and voting equipment must be available even when we've seen that it's not available in these places. Equipment must be, must enable independent voting by visually and or physically impaired voters. But in 2005, 30% of UK polling stations were not in compliance with that law that requires large print ballots or a physical template. Something that I've seen in Canada, not being denied. I mean, I've just seen bigger ballots being handed to people. This is, it's particularly funny to think about a blind person voting. I know it's kind of a little bit insensitive, but would they ever really know? Like, would you ever really know? I guess we don't ever really know, but would they ever really know? Another problem is staff. So staff must understand the necessity of taking steps to ensure access and to be able to show voters how to use this equipment, such as, the physical templates, as well as using disability etiquette to avoid patronizing voters and making them feel like little baby children. What does this accomplish, you ask? Voter suppression and all these weird little things that we've been talking about. Like, why would they do that? You're probably wondering, why would they do that? That seems silly. Seems like a lot of effort. And I'll tell you why they do that, because it's actually kind of effective. We know that voting has an effect on who wins an election. It's kind of what we hope voting is for. We also think that, voting decides what color the little map lights up on election day. There's red and there's blue, and we've stated actually recently there's been a larger influx of purple states. So purple. I have trouble. Purple. I just like to say it that way. Purple. So purple states have increased since 2004 and on to about 2012. There's no no coincidence that there is a rise in states proposed to have voter suppression laws that are also purple. So, laws that have been created... Sorry, I'm like losing my train of thought. So these laws are created in areas that are very vulnerable, let's just say. So with the gap being smaller and voter turnout at a record high, after 2008 election, states with that large kind of gap or that large turnout enacted these new laws. Some laws have passed, while others have not, fallen flat on their face, etc. What doesn't need a legislative hand in all of this is the social stigma that electoral fatigue and political burnout has. So we don't really need to fund it or actually actively suppress people with the want and need to vote in a climate where people are just genuinely fatigued about dealing with the government and they just don't want to. They don't have to pay for that, so that's probably pretty cool. I don't know if that last part made sense, because my teleprompter was going a little bit quick, so I had to like skip a few words in my rhetoric. I'm gonna take another quick break. I will be right back with the topic of burnout and what that means and what we can do to combat it and get our fire back in our bellies about politics.